Hello everybody and welcome to Millennium 7 Star, the channel that helps you make sense of military history and military technology. Today we are doing an experiment with, in one take, no edit, I am going to run through a list of air-to-air missiles and just tell something about those. I have the list of Wikipedia open in front of me. I will go through and we'll have a short chat for every kind of missile. I am not covering the United States, China and Russia because these systems are very well known, and also they will probably cover or suck all the time in. So yes, let's start. So Brazil, the Piranha family. The Piranha family is they started actually developing it many years ago in the 70s, but became operational just in the new century. Recently they also had a B. It's an infrared system that has been developed indigenously by Brazil with maybe some help from South Africa. If I remember correctly, one of the main characteristics of this weapon is the fact that the speed at which the gimbal can rotate is very, very high. Probably the fastest if it's not the fastest, it is one of the fastest in available today. And why this is important? It's important because if a target is traversing in front of the missile, the sensor needs to keep tracking, needs to follow the target, and if the target moves fast enough to actually be not allowed to be quicker than the sensor tracking, then there's a good possibility to avoid the interception. And this is a defensive measure that is definitely in use. Then Darter. The Darter is a short-range infrared that they have developed with South Africa. South Africa, we'll see probably later downward, comes from a different direction. While Brazil actually wanted to be just autonomous and have some high technology, and Brazil in the aerospace technology, is starting to have a role, starting to have its room on the market. South Africa started to develop a number of systems, mostly because during the apartheid it was cut off from the weapons import, arms import, and it was also involved in border wars on the north side, in Angola, in Namibia, and so on. They were keen to have some advanced weapons, and they were cut off from the market, and they started developing by themselves. France. AA-20, AA-25. Well, that's not very interesting. That's the first. AA-20, AA-25 is the first system that the French developed. It was in the 50s. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was a beam rider. But it is the typical. Well, France is the typical country that wants to be autonomous from United States or the ex-Soviet Union and Russia. So it's pouring a lot of resources in developing their own weapons and even in the air-to-air missile sector. And they do well. I honestly can't say that they're doing the incorrect thing. No, the dependency from third parties is always something that has its pros and cons, no? So the AA20 and AA25 are not really interesting, a very early system. I must say, we could compare them with the early Falcons models in the United States. Then we have the Matra R550 and the Matra Magic 2, which is basically the advanced version of the R550. And that's basically the equivalent of the American Sidewinder. If the general configuration is not much different, if the size is not much different, the weight is not much different, and the performance is not much different. The first generation was the 550, which was developed in late 50s, early 60s. The Magic 2 was the all-aspect version for the for the same missile. The Matra R530, Magic, Super 530F, and Super 530D. So that's the 530 family. I call family because here we see a pattern that French does, and the Soviet Union and first and Russia now does, which is having the same airframe, the same engine, but different guidance. The R530 was a missile started in the 60s, was used by the Mirages, Mirage 3 and Mirage 2000. Let's say it was roughly in the class of the Sparrow, and it comes in two versions. It comes with an infrared sensor, and it comes with a semi-active radar homing. What's the reason for that? Well, the reason is, well, obviously you may think the reason is just plain standardization, but it's not just that. There are two main elements. Two main elements that may be relevant in here. The first is that even if with an infrared sensor, the range may be shorter than with a semi-active radar homing, well, you still have the advantage of having an engine that burns longer, because it's supposed to take the semi-active radar homing version to a longer distance. So you still have the advantage of an engine that burns longer at short distances. That's improved maneuverability. And I suspect that this missile was definitely a bad customer for everybody. The second element is that you can use this system in a different tactical way. Let's say that the Anglo-Saxon... Yes, let's say this. Let's say that the Anglo-Saxon school says that you can launch one or two missiles toward the target and keep launching until you have scored. The French school and the Soviet or Russian schools actually they think that the best thing to do is to launch the missiles in salvos, where each missile has a different homing system. So if you can avoid the radar-guided missile, maybe you can't avoid the infrared radar missile. This is, by the way, one of the reasons that Russian fighters have a large number of weapons available, normally larger than Western counterparts. Yes, because they tend to use more. they tend to use more because they launch in salvos. MBDA, Mika and Meteor. No, okay, let's see Mika. So Mika is basically the current weapon for the Mirage 2000 and the Rafale. It is again a family, so there is an infrared version and an active radar homing version. You may consider them the equivalent of the AMRAAM and the French equivalent of the AMRAAM, and they have performances not that different. Bit shorter range, but they're not that different. They're considered very good. And again, at short range, you have the advantage the infrared version can have a very long burning engine. Okay, and the Meteor that we mentioned before, the Meteor is starting to be in use basically now, and as you know, it is a revolutionary missile. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's not just rocket propelled. It has an initial rocket booster. Then when all the propellant has burnt, the booster becomes the combustion chamber for a ramjet. So the missile is actually propelled, keeps being propelled at high speed for a very long part of its flight. Practically, so today basically all the air-to-air missiles now have a rocket engine that burns for a few seconds, in some cases a few tenths of seconds, and that basically it. Then they have to make do with the inertia and the capacity of flying. This means that while at short range, the missile is still propelled and can maneuver relatively easily. If it loses the energy, then it should be able to regain the energy quite quickly. When the engine is off, the more the missile maneuvers, the more energy loses. It slows down very, very easily, and the effectiveness decreases a lot. So having a long burn engine is a big advantage. The sensors, modern sensors, in a way or another, are capable of doing what they are needed. It is most of the time the kinematics of the engagement that causes a shot not to hit the target. So yes, the energy is consideration number one. And yes, the Meteor is a game changer from this point of view because it can fly like a plane for quite a long time. And so this translates, in a very long range, but this is not as important as the fact that it may maneuver against the target shorter distances while still being powered. I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised that the Meteor would be able to try to attack a target, fail, then come back and try to attack again. I wouldn't be surprised if it was capable of doing that. Germany, okay. Henschel HS-298, okay, this is World War II. I think it was that strange thing with the big propeller, so on. Okay, Meteor again. Rudelstahl X4, again World War II stuff. RZ-65 again. Viper, no, it's all stuff about the Second World War. We still have the Meteor. Iris-T. Iris-T is a very, very powerful, very, very modern infrared homing missile. Aerodynamically is quite particularly, has a great sensor, has a great image processing capacity, probably the best of its category. And it has a very, very decent, a very, very effective, very, very powerful engine. So even kinematically it's quite good. It is becoming very, very common in Europe, where it is actually replacing the Sidewinders. Yeah, I suppose that's a correct move. In between the Aris-T and the 9X, yes, tough choice. Tough match. India. Astra Mark I. Yes, the Astra is another of these initiatives that developing countries put together to try to become autonomous, and I can't agree more. It is a bit strange because it is a very long and thin weapon, looks like a pencil. Aerodynamically speaking, it is derived from the French Mika, because India had, still has, I suppose, quite close ties with France in the aerospace sector, particularly in design of the aerospace, in the design of systems. I mean, the Tejas, the indigenous fighter, it is. This has been designed, its general configuration has been designed with the help of the French design of the Assault, the French designer that made the Rafale. And the same is true for the Meteor. So it's an active radar homing missile, very efficient. It is particularly optimized for the long range, which may explain the length and the aerodynamic formula. We have yet to see the sensors, how they are, but well, looks good. And there's another element which is typical of India. India has in service a lot of different types of jets. Well, it has the Tejas, but also has the MiG-21, MiG-29, has Sukhois, still has Jaguars that have been retired in France and UK ages ago. With all this type of jets come different type of weapons. Mika, they have the Mika, they have the AAM, they have Soviet designs. Or Russian designs and so on. So this is it is often said that this is a logistic nightmare, it's very expensive, it shouldn't be like that, and so on, which is true. I'm sure it is a logistic nightmare, I'm sure it is very expensive, but honestly, if you have just one type of weapon, an opponent needs just to find one type of countermeasure. If you have different type of weapons of similar, somehow, effectiveness, then the opponent needs to find more countermeasure, different types countermeasures. So, contrary to what you often read in the American literature, uniformity is not good. At this point, I could speak about the decision of actually devoting everything to the F-35 in the West, but I won't do that now. Maybe it's a topic for a different video. Okay, Iran. Fater. As far as I know, is a copy of the Sidewinder. Iran had a very developed defense industry, and they even from the time of the Shah, they were doing quite well. Today, since they've always been a bit isolated, well, they're trying to do their best with what they have, and I suppose that this is this missile now is can be framed within this perspective. No, it is autonomous mechanism. Sigil. Yes, this is not a real air-to-air missile. They managed to use the Hawk missile, the surface-to-air missile, and turn it into an air-launched weapon, which is probably the wrong thing to do. You really need to be really desperate to do that, because it's bulky, it's cumbersome, not definitely the best thing. And Fakur 90, which is, again, a copy of the Phoenix, because as you know, I'm sure, if you're following this channel, you will probably know that Iran still operates some F-14s, and they basically ran out a long time ago of Phoenix missiles, which they did surprisingly well, to be honest, because they were supposed to be used against bombers at very long range, so against targets that didn't maneuver much, but they did quite good even against fighters during the Iran-Iraq war. So yes, I'm not surprised that they created a copy of the Fakur 90. If I remember correctly, there was some news that said that despite that the missile from the outside looks like a copy of the AIM-54 Phoenix, inside the technology is basically the same of the Hawk, which I don't know how true this may be, but probably the Hawk is simpler than the Phoenix, so yes, may have a meaning. Iraq, Al-Murubi, which I have no idea. Israel, Python, Shafrir 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Derby. Okay, Israel has a similar story to France. Started working on their missiles in the 50s, late 50s, because they wanted to be autonomous with the munitions. The first one that they built was the Python, that in service in the early 60s, and then has been improved and went on. And the story was always the same. So they had in the infrared versions, they had first limited engagement capacity just from the just from the rear of the plane. Then they move on to the all aspects, and they move on to the focal plane arrays. In the radar guided version, they had first no radar guided version. My memory actually just doesn't serve me well, because what they're working now is the Derby. The current weapon is the Derby, which is actually a long-range active radar homing missile, which is considered one of the most sophisticated in the world. And many air forces wanted to acquire that in place of the Amram, even because the Israelis are, as long as you don't sell to the Arabs, they're fine. Italy, Alenia Aspide, well, we have an entire video about that, derived from the Sparrow, but an entirely new missile. Didn't see a lot of service, but served as the base for at least some of the Chinese air-to-air missiles, and also had a very, very large success as a surface-to-air missile. So, yeah, good. Japan, family AAM, very interesting, very varied name, from 1 to 5. Well, they They're basically local copies of the Sidewinder. And if I remember well, yes, the latest version, the 345, I remember well, were increasingly Japanese. The configuration of the 5, also known as Type 04, is much similar to the Mika, which you can start seeing a pattern here now, because the American have sorry. Because the Americans have this configuration like the AAM, which the Russians sort of copy, with the Chinese copy as well, but the rest of the world tend to have this configuration with very short but with the long chord wings of the missile, which has an advantage, is providing quite a lot of lift. Well, everything is relative, but it is providing quite a lot of lift with a very low drag. And yes, not used in the West, don't know why. South Africa, well, Kukri, I've already seen, short-range infrared, it's an old system. And Darter, which is basically a local version of the Brazilian missiles that we discussed before. But the South African is also building a beyond visual range version. Again, the point is better being autonomous. Taiwan, Skyward 1 and 2, these are basically Sidewinder copies. Not much to say. United Kingdom. Fireflash. The Fireflash is the most peculiar missile that I've ever seen. It was built with 2 boosters side by side. And in the middle, and pretty much hanging on the back, there was another missile, the real missile, that when the boosters were off, it's actually detached, and the missile kept flying by inertia. It's the strangest thing and the most nut concept that I've ever seen. And I have to say, it didn't work. They built a few hundred, 500, I think, or something like that. And they were used for tests to develop the idea, the concept of using air-to-air missiles in the 50s, no? And they were used for training, but never used in combat. The first real missile was the Firestreak, which was the weapon of all the generation of British fighters in the 50s and 60s, which was, well, probably on par with the Sidewinder at the time. It is Sidewinder or Sidewinder? Tell me in the comments below. And yeah, second part of the list of air-to-air missiles. So yes, the Firestreak was produced in quite a lot of units, and since at the time United Kingdom still exported quite a lot, was also used by a lot of countries. Wasn't great, it was a first generation missile with all the problems of these missiles, so it was replaced by the Red Top, which was much more efficient. We are still in the 60s, 70s. It still became the weapon for the British Lightning. It was a important interceptor. And yeah, it also I often use pictures of the fire streak and the red top in my videos because yeah, I think that they are not typical, they're not well known, they're not the usual American stuff, but they have been important because they were like the French weapons, they were a good example of alternative development. Tile Dog's RAM? What the hell is this? Okay, no, this is yes, no, I've seen a picture on Wikipedia. I remember that this is something that they developed in the 70s, 80s as a very agile, very light and very agile dogfight missile. Never seen service. Skyflash is very important. It was a version of the Sparrow, derived from the Sparrow, but with a new sensor, with a new type of sensor, monopole sensor, like the Aspide, and which pretty much fixed a lot of the problems of the Sparrow. ASRAM is typically British product, derived from the Sidewinder, even though it lacks some wings. Has a new sensor, a focal plane array sensor, believed to be very effective, and it's much more maneuverable than the Sidewinders. Has pretty much no wings or very small wings, so relies everything on the body lift, which is a quite particular choice. Okay, Meteor, and we've already covered. And then, yeah, that's everything. I don't know if you like this or you don't like this. Just let me know in the comment below, but I will see from the views. If you just like me rambling around like this, maybe I should do some some lives about these things. But okay, thank you for watching and goodbye.